Well, my next speaker is John Ashworth of Fishing for Leave. And having made his living from design and manufacture of equipment for trawlers since the 60s, John is uniquely expert in his knowledge and understanding of our fisheries, so treacherously surrendered by Edward Heath. He's the author of 2 CIB booklets on fisheries, which are on the table there, the most recent of which is Seizing the Moment, the importance of urgency of pushing on with a proper settlement of the fisheries question. And in producing, they've also produced the most authoritative handbook on fisheries, the Brexit textbook, which is an expensive book to produce. It's £10, but if you're interested in fisheries and you want to argue the case, it's quite invaluable. He and his colleagues have produced plans for a new system of fishing control which abolishes the corruption and inefficiency of the EU quota system. He's been indefatigable in lobbying ministers, civil servants, MPs and their researchers. And he told me that one high-powered conference which produced weighty recommendations on fisheries policy, he asked whether any of the experts present had any seagoing experience. No one's hand went up. The resulting recommendations, he said, were rather like the curate's egg, good in parts. So for something which is good all the way through, and no more shilly-shallying, and without any further ado, let's hear John's urgent message.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry apologise for not standing up, but I'm afraid I can't stand up for long, and I can't speak for long either. But after having heard what the other speakers have said, I've rather abandoned what I was proposed saying, and I'm just going to speak off the cuff. One thing I'm not going to do is reallocate to Greece, because it sounds as if many of us have reached our sell-by date already, which is a tragedy. 17 months ago, I walked into this building for the first time, and I was trying to find the room that we were meeting in. And I walked into one room, and there was a gentleman sitting in the corner having his light lunch. And I couldn't, being a Yorkshireman, I have to speak to everyone. So I went up and spoke to this gentleman. And within 5 minutes, he extracted from me everything he knew about me and has got me signed up for writing articles. And that was you, Edward. They persuaded me to write articles over the Christmas holidays, which I did. And I'm very grateful to your campaign manager, John Petley, because I write in a rather unusual fashion. I think it's with reading treaties and regulations for the last 30 years that I rather write in the same manner. And I'm grateful for John for helping me compile those booklets, because without his help, I certainly could never have done it. One thing that the gentleman from New Zealand brought up was the question of sacrifice. It's not very known that the fishing industry had the highest casualties during the Second and First World War of any industry whatsoever. And this was another Edward who said that they were dispensable. Well, we got our own back on June the 15th when we came up the Thames. And I'm grateful for John again helping me on that day, because it was a very emotional day. But we brought the battle right to the centre of the Remain camp. And when we met David Jones, number 2 at Brexit, he said you had the audacity to come right into the centre. But he said what an impact it made. And I think it did. One of the things that I must congratulate Campaign for Independent Britain for is they've been a tremendous help to us. We couldn't have done what we have done without your support and your help. It's been a tremendous 17 months, and we've got a long way to go yet. The 23rd of June was just the beginning, and a lot of people thought that was the end. It was all over. But quite frankly, we thought we were only just starting, and that's what's proved to be the case. First of all, we were one of the first to start saying about Article 50. It's surprising how many ministers and civil servants we've met that actually had knew about it, but had never read it. And they didn't know the contents of it, and they didn't know what it meant, or what would happen when they invoked it. So we had to put them correct on that. We then moved on to the London 1964 Convention, because that was another thing that they didn't know about. Because even when we come out of Brexit, we're tied by that. And that goes back to something that cropped up earlier. In 1960, we formed the EFTA, the European Free Trade Association. And from day one, Macmillan and Heath were betraying that organisation. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head now, because my memory is not so good now. But I know there was Norway, Austria, Portugal, Liechtenstein, and I can't remember the other two countries that were involved. But we let them down badly. We set that up as an alternative to the EEC. And from day one, we were undermining them. And we let them down very badly. But that's just the way it was. But what happened on that is because de Gaulle vetoed in 1963 our application. That was when the territorial waters were going from 3 to 12 miles. And what happened is Britain called a convention of all the European countries. And as a SOP, we think it was a SOP, we can't prove it, but to de Gaulle, we gave France 15 fishing rights, major fishing rights, in our 6 to 12 mile limit. And those still comply today. And that's one of the things that we've been able to highlight. And Theresa May has promised that she's going to look into it. Otherwise, whatever happens, they will still have those rights. Then we moved on. Then we moved. The next stage we're moving on to, which is very serious to understand, is the Great Repeal Bill. It's a Great Repeal Bill in the sense it's going to get rid of the European Communities 1972 Act. But there's another sinister side to it. It's not it's a continuity bill, because they're going to bring the acquis all back into domestic legislation. So for us, as far as fishery is concerned, and it does comply with one or two other subjects, on one hand, Article 50 takes us completely out of the common fisheries policy, but by domestic legislation, we're actually going to replace it with something identical. And that's what we're fighting with at the moment, and we've got to get that sorted out before it's too late. So where do we move from here? We've got to make sure it's quite established that we have a proper fisheries policy in place. One of the things that's been so tragic for me, and I've worked in fisheries all over the world, is we have probably the greatest marine resource around the United Kingdom of anywhere else in the world. That's all to do with the depth of water, the tides, the currents, the movement of the feed that comes up from the Gulf of Mexico. It's unique of anywhere in the world. But one of the problems we've got is we have a tremendous mixed fishery on the ground, not the pelagic species that are mid-water, but the ones that are on the bottom. And we need a unique policy for that alone. And you get all these academics that turn around and say, you must follow Norway, you must follow Iceland. No, we are totally different to them. We have a different fishery altogether. And what we don't want is this quota system. Quota system is the most disastrous thing out. It's created discarding. We discard about 50% of the catch. A skipper friend of mine was fishing in the English Channel at the end of January, and he was fishing for whiting and haddock. And he got this bumper haul up, and he thought Christmas had come late. And to his horror, it was sea bass. And he got 500 boxes of sea bass. And that value was worth £170,000. That's what and he had to dump the whole lot back dead in the sea. Because if he had been caught with it, he would have lost his license. And worse still, the authorities, if he'd said anything, would have hounded him, which had been done before. And this is what happens. We've got such conflict between the fishermen, the fisheries officer, the scientists, that there's complete fight among each other. No one cooperates with each other. And this is the sort of things that's happened. The authorities will hound anyone who steps out of line or says anything which is contrary to what they're wanting to do. So we've got a horrendous position on our hands. But when you've been in a situation like I have, where I've helped shovel tons and tons of fish over the side dead, it's immoral what's gone on, and it's got to change. But the potential, and this is the thing that's so difficult for someone like myself to get across to you, the potential out there is absolutely enormous. It could be a fantastic industry. It can rejuvenate the whole of our coastal communities, which I've seen die over the last 30 years. It's tragic to see some of the places you go to now, which there's no ships, nothing in the harbour, all dead, boarded up villages and towns. It is an absolute disgrace what's been going on. So we've got an opportunity now to do something about it. And sadly, one of the things is that fishing for leave is by the grassroots movement. It's not by the leaders of the industry, because the leaders of the industry are defending the indefensible. Some of them want things to continue as they are, because they've invested a lot of money in what's happening, and they don't want it to change. But change it has got to do, because without it, we are just going backwards. So when we come to the final thing, the lady from Denmark mentioned Greenland. I remember Greenland very well. They had a horrible time with the European Union. The European Union were bully boys to Greenland and pushed them around. But Greenland then suddenly snapped and said, enough is enough. You get your boats out of our waters. And suddenly the European Union said, oh, no, we'll give you a lovely deal. And they got a most fantastic trade deal. And it also turned out all right. But the same thing will happen again. And I can see the same thing happening with the European Union, being bully boys to start with, pushing their weight around. And the one issue we have got over them is our fishing waters. Because come Brexit, when the treaties under Article 50, Section 3, cease to apply, we take back under international law our 200-mile median line. Without an agreement, no European Union vessel is allowed to fish in our waters. Now, we can't fish in theirs, but we don't take much out of theirs. They take mainly out of ours, of which they take 59% of our resource. Now, if that happened, France would lose 80% of her fleet. Spain would lose 50% of her fleet. And I'm sad to say that Denmark would probably have a run on a bank, because there's one bank that has invested millions into building up the Danish fleet. So that would be tragic in itself. But the fishing might be a small industry, but it's got tremendous overtones. And when they talk about boundaries, the boundary of the United Kingdom is our maritime boundary. It's not our land boundary at all. It's the boundary of our maritime side. So there's everything to play for. It's a fantastic opportunity we've got there. Nature has bestowed a tremendous benefit on the United Kingdom. But it's not the fishing industry. It doesn't belong to the fishing industry. It belongs to every person in this country. It's a national resource, and it should be dealt with in that manner. Thank you very much.